Right, Olivia Utley, as usual on a Friday, is here. Hello, nice
Hello.
to see you. Deputy leader writer of The Sun. I'm going to quote what you've written in a second in today's editorial in The Sun. But first of all, this opinion poll, it's an Ipsos Mori poll, and for the first time, Labour have gone ahead. They're 5 points ahead of the Tories, and this was a poll taken before Sir Keir Starmer's speech yesterday, which got him a lot of plaudits. What do you make of that? 5 points ahead before the speech.
Yeah, well, I'm not hugely surprised. I think that Keir Starmer is coming across as a pretty persuasive leader. Although, I mean, I think we'll talk about my leader in a moment, talking about how he really has to just kick out Jeremy Corbyn for good now. But I also think, I mean, yeah, I'm surprised that Labour hasn't climbed up before. Boris Johnson really has failed quite a few times now.
And you speak as a Tory newspaper.
Absolutely.
You're a Tory paper.
But, you know, this picking ridiculous fights, the Marcus Rashford thing, I mean, why give him an MBE and then decide that actually his cause isn't worth it and the government should dig its heels in against him seems completely mad. And just kind of, there have been a lot of failings. I mean, personally, I think that the answer is get Rishi in, whose popularity in Scotland is absolutely incredible. There was another poll out today showing that Scottish independence is leading by double figures now. Yes is leading by double figures. Yep. Ooh. And yet, in Scotland, Rishi Sunak is more popular than Alex Ferguson. So I think there's an obvious answer to both of these polls here.
It shows, doesn't it, that increasingly in the modern age, it's all about personal presentation.
Absolutely.
I mean, I think personally one of the reasons that Nicola Sturgeon is doing so well, whatever you think of her, she plays a blinder every day in her press conference. She just comes over really well.
She can come out with whatever she likes. Yeah. She talks absolute rubbish all the time, but she has a just very earnest voice.
There's something about her.
Sort of looks good and is good at politics. She's a very good politician.
Yes. I find myself nodding along sometimes at what she's saying, and then I kind of have to shake my head and say, no, but I don't agree with that. Why am I nodding? She has a very, very deft touch, and Boris seems to have lost his. I wonder if this actually informs, and we've been talking about this a lot on the show this week. I'd love to know what you think. I wonder if the government's bullheaded approach to lockdowns, and we are getting a national lockdown by another name, you know, they're just merging together into one big solid ice sheet, as I said. I wonder if it's been informed by the fact that it nearly killed him, that he had a terrible experience with it.
Definitely has. He was a joyful libertarian before. Boris of the 3 wives or whatever it is, 7 children, loves going out for a drink. Extreme lockdowns don't seem to be his style at all. No. And then he got really ill with it, and that changed his perspective. And it also really tired him out, is what I keep hearing from people inside government. That, I mean, there was that brilliant piece in the Sunday Times explaining how he's having to nap during the day because he can't keep his focus.
This is long COVID,
exactly, classic long COVID. And I mean, of course, really, he hasn't bounced back after nearly dying in 6 months.
And a baby.
Exactly. And strained relationships with his ex-wife and with his children. Really, really stressful year for him. And the stress is really beginning to show.
Well, we had a political pundit in here. If they're listening, forgive me, I can't remember your name offhand. I'm terrible with names. I have to write everything down. Who was predicting 2 or 3 days ago that Boris wasn't interested in running for election next time, that he'll actually stand down and leave politics. Because he's just tired of it. Would you agree with that?
Well, I wouldn't be hugely surprised. I mean, I don't know Boris Johnson personally, but I think he wanted to leave some sort of legacy. If there's a COVID vaccine and we leave the EU successfully with a deal, he will have left a legacy. I don't think his sort of personal motivations are the same as Theresa May's. She wanted to kind of do her public duty and to stay there and just kind of sit it out. I don't think Boris Johnson is like that. I think he has a life outside politics, perhaps unlike May. He's got friends, he's got fun he wants to have. He's also short on money, which I know sounds ridiculous because he earns quite a lot as Prime Minister, but with 5 children, 6 children, 7 children, whatever.
Well, he's certainly earning less than he was earning before he became Prime.
Exactly.
That's the point. His income's fallen. Cut.
Yeah.
So you
sort of think, leave the legacy. Yeah. If I were him, I'd want to leave the legacy, go back to my fun life, earn quite a lot more money on the dinner party speech circuit.
Yeah. Well, you seem to infer from this poll that puts Labour at 5 points ahead, you seem to infer in your opening remarks, and I agree with you, that it's because basically Boris is performing poorly and Keir Starmer, particularly yesterday, although the poll was taken before that, is behaving in a more strong way. Or more strongly, I think is the better English way of putting it. But do you think it's also because people are fed up with lockdowns and they're fed up with the mixed messages that we've had from central government about how to deal with COVID, that they've lost faith in the government?
Yeah, I think that if they want softer lockdowns, then I don't think Keir Starmer's the man for them, really. But I think they're very fed up with the lack of clarity. I mean, I was writing my leader today. really fed up with not knowing what's going to happen over Christmas. I mean, yes, we might have to go into a harsher lockdown, and we might not, but let us know either way. People need to order their turkeys, invite their grandparents round, or if we're not going to, if Christmas can't happen in the way we're expecting, children should be sort of let down gently, etc., etc. Why isn't there just a clear message from the government? And they've had so many opportunities for clarity is all that really matters, and they're just not pulling through on that.
I also think people, I certainly speak for myself and many people that I know, I think we're sick of being manipulated, having our emotions manipulated. And I've said this, I think, on every programme that I've done this week, and I'll just say it briefly here, this three-tier system, 3 tiers is fine, but the way they've actually been branded, starting with medium, high and very high, why not low, medium and high? That's basic, obvious manipulation of our thinking. But also, you look at these press conferences, which sometimes happen after the government press statement, but Boris at the lectern and Whitty and Vallance either side of him, and then you get questions from people like you and from broadcast media, but nobody is ever allowed to ask a follow-up. Now, you are experienced as a journalist in doing interviews. I'm very experienced in doing media interviews. I was on Good Morning Britain a year or two ago, because I sit in for Piers Morgan sometimes when he's not in, and I interviewed the then Defence Secretary, Gavin Williamson, and he wouldn't answer a question. But basically, I was challenging him on something he'd said after the Salisbury poisonings, when do you remember, he'd said that Russia should shut up and go away, which made him sound like Vicky Pollard, and he got a lot of stick for it. So we did an interview about something else that he was on for, and then as his custom, I said, now look, before you go, a few months ago you said, shut up and go away to Russia. Do you now regret that choice of words? And he completely ignored the question and told me that how well the National Health Service was doing in Salisbury. I said, no, we know that, stop. The question was, and I said it again, and he gave me another complete BS answer, not even acknowledging the question, so I stopped him again, asked him a third time, and he did it again. It was blatant obfuscation. So actually I said, now this is because I could ask follow-ups. I said, in that case, Minister, you're not going to answer the question, are you? Interview terminated, and basically kicked him off the air. It sounds rude, but if you can see it, it went viral, you can see it. It was a logical conclusion to a government minister refusing to ask a very simple question, which he had the duty to answer and refused to. And it wasn't insulting to me, it was insulting to the listeners or to the viewers. And I feel the same way about these press conferences. Someone like you will ask a tough question to, say, Boris Johnson. He'll give you like 30 seconds of waffle and say, next question. And you can't come back to him and say, Prime Minister, you haven't answered the question. Here it is a second time. And if he doesn't answer it, here it is a third time. I actually think that you guys should be boycotting these press conferences, because they're not press conferences. They're exercises in media manipulation and manipulation of the audience. Do you have any sympathy with that view?
Yeah, I completely do. It's so tiresome, and so often the government just won't. It's not just the press conferences. Government just won't come on particular media shows. I mean, finally they've backed down on not coming on the Today programme. They will go on the Today programme now, but how ridiculous, it just, I'm sure it all stems from Dominic Cummings. It's sort of just disregard for the media. No, we're above that. We can't. And that's the whole thing, sort of inward-looking number 10 who thinks it is above the media and thinks it's above being questioned. And that's why we've got where we are and why the public really is losing faith.
You mentioned Dominic Cummings. I was going to ask you this, and it kind of got lost in the wayside, but you talked about this ludicrous situation the government's got themselves into with the school meals vouchers, and a totally unnecessary PR disaster. You can see their logic, you can see the inner logic of their arguments, but that's not the point. It's all about presentation, and it would have been such a simple thing to do. Why didn't Dominic? I would have thought, if he's meant to be the master of the dark arts, as Alistair Campbell was back in the Blair days, why didn't Dominic Cummings see that coming? If he's meant to be such a genius.
Well, I think he sees himself as a sort of policy genius, and this is about optics, and I think too often Dominic Cummings thinks he's above optics and above kind of pure politics,
like testing his eyesight by going for a drive.
Well, exactly. I think he kind of thinks he knows the nation, but he doesn't like this celebrities interfering. He'll think, no, we've got our policy, we're going to stick to it, and he thinks that it looks good to be the hard man, when just quite often it really doesn't. No. So I don't think he's got that kind of spin doctor genius that Alistair Campbell had, perhaps. He just he thinks he's a kind of brilliant policy wonk, and I'm not even sure if he is. But as you say, there was a kind of logic to the position, but, come on, when you've got the whole country backing this brilliant young black football star who's asking for something very minor considering what's been spent already. Come on, who is... Yeah.
It's a no-brainer, isn't it?
Absolute no-brainer.
All right, let's turn to page 12 of The Sun today. This is all you. There are 3 editorial pieces in here. The main one's headlined Labour Shame. You basically summarise what the report into anti-Semitism in the party said yesterday, and I'm just going to go down to about paragraph 4 or 5 and just read these few lines. You say, this is what you wrote last night. How did Labour, the party of Clement Attlee, Jim Callaghan and John Smith, sink so low? In 2 words, Jeremy Corbyn. The fact that he's an apologist for anti-Semitism is now wholly indisputable. Now, and you mentioned his, quote, Jew-hating terrorist friends. We're talking about Hamas and the groups in the Middle East that he has called friends and met with and had tea with and all the rest of it. People who murder Israelis. What do you think? Do you think that genuinely Corbyn doesn't believe that he's anti-Semitic, but he's simply anti-Israel and anti-Israeli policies? And that's his excuse, if you like, and his excuse for tolerating anti-Semitism. He said he didn't, but the report said basically he did, in his own party. Do you think that's, to use a word I used earlier, that's the carapace under which he's been operating all this time?
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. I think he just didn't really have the intellectual capacity. I mean, it was ridiculous that he was leader of the opposition at all. He wasn't bright enough to be doing it.
No, he's not a clever man.
No, exactly. So I don't think it is that he personally hates Jews. I think that he hates a lot of Israel's policies and hates Israel generally, and therefore just completely turns a blind eye to it, because he's a very, very stubborn man, a cranky old man who's never changed his mind in his life and won't change his mind now. So I think that's exactly the problem. And that he attracts anti-Semites and he doesn't do anything about it when they rear their ugly heads.
And the trouble, I guess the trouble for Labour with him as their leader was that until Ed Miliband changed the membership rules of the party with the infamous £3, £3 membership, which let in the activists and allowed them to seize control of the levers of power in the party and install Jeremy Corbyn. I mean, it was a classic, sort of hijack from the inside. And that was Miliband's fault. And it gave Labour a terrible, terrible 4 or 5 years. That's hopefully kind of in the past now. But because Corbyn himself and his acolytes never thought for a split second before that happened that they'd come anywhere near the number 10 Downing Street or the leadership of the party. They never thought that they'd come close to it. He was free to act in his maverick way throughout his political career. Big picture on the front page of the Daily Mail today. It's in other papers too, showing Corbyn at a 2014, so before the Ed Miliband thing, wreath-laying ceremony at the graves of terrorists who killed Olympic sportsmen at the Munich Olympics massacre. Actually there, looking sorrowful, holding the wreath, not in the background, but he's there, holding the wreath. And of course, doing and saying so much more, talking about Hamas as friends, and all of that baggage came with him into office, didn't it? And it was something which he could never deny. And that picture makes him look anti-Semitic.
Yeah, of course it does. How he didn't see that, but how also did all the people? I mean, I talk about this, my leader as well. Keir Starmer is among them, but all of the Labour MPs who knew that this was bad, who made a big fuss about it, who shouted about. Well, Keir Starmer was on the front bench, so he couldn't. But who absolutely knew that Corbyn was an apologist for anti-Semitism, but didn't actually stand up and do anything about it. Didn't leave the party. I think Luciana Berger, she did a fantastic job in walking out. It was possible to walk out, and too many people sat around. So I don't think Corbyn is to blame, but all the people who let him get as far as he did and who campaigned for him to get into Downing Street less than a year ago.
Absolutely.
They should take a big share of the blame as well.
Look at Angela Rayner, the current deputy leader, who said on radio yesterday, I heard the interview, she said on the radio yesterday that Corbyn was a decent man, but he, quote, had a blind spot when it came to these things meaning anti-Semitism. Well, I didn't hear her saying that when Baroness Chakrabarty, she wasn't a baroness then, was conducting her inquiry. I didn't hear her say that a year ago. I didn't hear her say that when the whole debate and the argument about anti-Semitism in Labour became absolutely extant. She didn't say it then, did she? She didn't say, yes, I agree, actually, Jeremy's got a blind spot on this. Never said a word about it.
Exactly, and there are all these clips of Keir Starmer talking about, I'm 100% behind Jeremy, I'm definitely behind Jeremy. I notice he's now not calling him Jeremy, he's Jeremy Corbyn again. But, this was less than a year ago. What's changed? He knew it, we all knew it.
But would you also, to be fair, let's try and be fair to Keir Starmer on this, because he did a good job yesterday. I mean, no doubt about it. I mean, my first reaction was, that's a leader's speech. That's how leaders should talk. This is the nature of real politics, isn't it? I mean, if you're in opposition and you're on the front bench, you can't really be seen to be criticising your own leader unless you want to resign, unless you want to get out of the game, and not have any skin in the game anymore. So do you think we should be... I mean, some of the papers are very harsh on him on that point today, and a lot of our listeners were too yesterday. The first barrage of tweets that came in after he made his speech was, yes, it was a good speech, but why didn't he make it, a year and a half ago? Why did he support Jeremy in the election and all of that? But do you think we should cut him some slack, because that's the nature of politics?
Yes, a little bit of slack, and I do think he did the right thing. Although it should be noted that he only suspended Corbyn pending investigation. What more investigations needed? We just had an 18 months investigation by the EHRC. So, why not just kick him out immediately and all of his little cronies in the party?
That's what you say in your piece today, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. I don't really see the need for this extra investigation. But yes, he has done a relatively good job now, and I think he himself is quite a decent man. But he is also a careerist, so I think it's possible to think both of those things together, which is what the Sun's saying today. He should be cut a little bit of slack, but let's not forget.
You also sorry, I'm distracting you because I'm looking at your article here. You also say that Luciana Berger and her ilk will go down as heroines in the history books for having the courage to walk away. I wonder how they're feeling this morning.
Oh, I know. I mean, there was a brilliant interview, I think it was on LBC yesterday, with Luciana Berger, who talked about everything that she went through as a Jewish MP in the Labour Party. It was horrific, the amount of abuse she got. So they can hold their heads up high, all of them. And I mean, Change UK was a bit of a joke and we all like to laugh at it, but actually I quite rate all of those MPs who probably knew that their career in politics was over when they set up that party, at least if not immediately, then pretty soon. And I think they had real guts to walk away.
What do you think of what Len McCluskey said yesterday? He basically said it was a disgrace that Jeremy was being treated in this way. It was outrageous and indefensible and blah-de-blah-de-blah. And this was going to absolutely dominate the party and destroy it over the next 4 years. And they wouldn't have a chance of winning the next election because of this unless he was allowed back in pronto. I thought that was billed. I also smiled rather wryly because this was coming from the union leader who just a few days ago revealed his colours on Newsnight when he was asked a question about Peter Mandelson, and he said in effect that Peter Mandelson he never listened to what he said, and this is the quote. He said that Peter should go back into his room and count his gold, which is a classic anti-Jewish trope. It's what people say, and we all know that it's a cliche. So he revealed himself, and of course he immediately had to apologise. Do we think we should be listening to him? Do you think he has any kind of a point to make? And do you think actually his support for Jeremy does Jeremy Corbyn more harm than good?
Yeah, quite possibly. No, I don't think we should be listening to him. I mean, I suppose his view sort of matters, and it shows that this will be quite a seismic split in Labour. These should be all cranks on the outside of the party, but they're not because of, as you say, how they ingratiated themselves right at the beginning of Corbyn's leadership. But no, I don't think we should be listening to him, nor do I think that people like Aaron Bastani and Ash Sarkar and any of these other sort of Corbynite cheerleaders and Owen Jones, they shouldn't really be getting airtime anymore. Their views are irrelevant. They're a fringe group who don't matter. I mean, get a Conservative and a Labour
Couldn't agree more.
pundit on TV. It's not two sides of an argument whether anti-Semitism is defendable or whether it's not.
No, and we've always had these media darlings, haven't we? These favourites of particularly the liberal left media, who just never seem to go away, and hardly anyone agrees with them. They're just broadcasting to a kind of a closed room, basically, but they get airtime. Like Professor Neil Ferguson, still being used by the BBC as an expert witness in programmes like the Today Show. He's totally discredited.
Exactly.
Not only because he was a hypocrite and broke his own lockdown rules and had to resign from Sage in disgrace, although he stayed on at Imperial College, but because all his predictions going back years have been wrong. He's never right in his models about pandemics, and yet for some reason the BBC wants to trot him out every couple of weeks. This is insane.
They don't really understand. Yes, balance. Of course we need to have balance, but balance isn't right and wrong. You don't just have someone wrong on for the sake of having balance.
Yes, wouldn't that be funny if you had a presenter on another station, not this one, saying, well, there we've had actually a statement of the truth. Now we'd like to have some lies. We'd like to hear the wrong argument now, if that's okay. I mean, just for balance. You're right. It's absolutely bonkers. I'd like to get back to Christmas. We talked about the fact that most people that I know, and so many people, and I bet it's the case with you, that you know, are planning to, in a reasonably moderate way, break the law this Christmas and have more than 6 people around for turkey. It's just going to happen.
Absolutely.
We did a call out. I said, please send me a text or a call. If you're actually one of the people who isn't going to break that rule of 6, who isn't going to have people in the house you shouldn't have, the screen was blank. Nobody called in. Everybody was calling to say, well, yeah, I'm sorry, I'm going to see my parents. I haven't seen my parents for ages. I'm having Christmas with my mum and dad. My dad's only got 6 months to live, whatever. There are all sorts of reasons. We are going round, and there's going to be 10 of us, and sorry, that's that. And there's all this talk about the police knocking on doors on Christmas Day and coming in and breaking up Christmas dinners. I mean, it's insane. What's your take on what happened with Victoria, Derbyshire this week? I know we're reviewing everything that's happened this week, but Victoria, Derbyshire, Radio Times said, I'm breaking this rule. I'm having 7 people round, and that's that. And then huge fuss, and I presume because of pressure from her employers, she had to say, I apologise, it was the wrong thing to say. I wonder if she still will do it, but anyway.
I'm sure she will.
What did you make of that story? Victoria, Derbyshire having to do this sudden U-turn.
Well, yeah, she was saying what absolutely all of us are thinking. And I think it was completely wrong with the BBC to tweet saying it. The BBC press office tweeted, Victoria Derbyshire had said she will break the rule of 6 this year. Do you think she's right or wrong? Which is just obviously encouraging a massive pile-on, which seems to be an incredibly bad taste. I think you're right that she was just saying what all of us are quietly thinking. I mean, in my age group, people in their 20s aren't going to spend Christmas at home in a grim flat share. Clearly not. They're going to go back to their parents.
No. And do you think that actually what's going to happen is, and you said we need clarity, do you think in the end we will get some clarity? Because the government's going to recognise that there's no point having a law that nobody's going to obey. It just makes them look foolish and makes them look out of control. Do you think they'll bow to the inevitable and say, we're making exception for 3 days over Christmas? Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, Boxing Day, you can have up to a dozen people.
I really hope so. I think that's the only sensible thing to do. And from their perspective, it's the only sensible thing to do as well. Because if people ignore it over Christmas, they'll ignore it after Christmas as well. And it'll just become a bit of a joke. Exactly. Whereas at the moment, people are mainly following it. So give us a dispensation. And
it's a tiny bit. I was talking to a very elderly friend of mine who lived through the last war, and he said the first 2 or 3 years of the war, everybody carried their gas mask with them. It was the law. You had to carry a gas mask. And then it became quite clear that gas wasn't going to be used. The Germans weren't going to drop gas bombs on us. And most people stopped carrying them. It was still the law. People were still fined for not having it. But in the end, people made their own decision. They made their own assessment of the risk, which they thought was incredibly low, and they stopped carrying these blooming great tins around with the heavy gas mask in, just kept them at home. And that's what happens. But in the end, people make their own decisions in a democracy and in a free society, and they don't like being told what to do when it's the wrong thing. And in the end, they stop doing it. Lovely talking to you. I will see you next week. I'd like to talk to you again next week, because that was dead interesting.